For the second straight Monday, it's unfortunate that the game does, for a moment at least, take a backseat to a gruesome injury that we saw. It appears that the Cleveland Browns will be without Nick Chubb for the remainder of this season after a gruesome knee injury. It begs the question immediately, and we did see some of it, but what are the Browns without Nick Chubb in that running game?
They're a completely different football team. Now, credit to Jerome Ford and the rest of that running game for getting nearly 200 yards by the time it was all said and done. The Steelers really had no answers. But there's a difference between Jerome Ford, who I said had a great evening, and what Nick Chubb brings to this offense. Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs in the NFL, and I said it during the halftime segment after he got injured early on in that game. We will find out how much these running backs are worth when you lose someone the caliber of Nick Chubb on a team in the Browns that came off that huge Week 1 win. They probably win this football game, if we're being honest, if Nick Chubb stays healthy and doesn't suffer that knee injury earlier in this ball game. So it's a problem. And you do wonder, Joe, are they just going to roll with Jerome Ford here? And they have also James Pierre on the roster, who they picked up from the Patriots. Or do you go out and look for someone else? And that's a conversation we'll have in the coming days. But there are some names out there. Cam Akers possibly a trade choice. We heard Sean McVay talk about that. Leonard Fournette's out there. Kareem Hunt, who played previously with the Browns, is also available. And
Jonathan Taylor is the name that gets thrown around in every running back conversation right now. He still an Indianapolis Colt, and what it would take to get him there, and then 2 massive running back contracts on the books for next year. Hopefully with Chubb coming back would be a whole nother scenario. Let's talk about the winning side here. Steelers pull this off thanks to the defense largely in part, but I want to talk about Kenny Pickett. About 50% with the ball in the air, 15 of 30. 222, touchdown, interception. What have you seen in Pickett here? Because we came into the season with a lot of hopes after what we saw during the preseason that the maturation and the growth would happen. Are you seeing that growth at all?
No. In a word, no. And there are glimpses of it, but then you see things like this, a slant by George Pickens, and he doesn't see Grant Delpit standing right. I mean, Grant Delpit is just watching the quarterback's eyes, and that's the easiest interception Grant Delpit may ever get. Those plays can't happen from your second-year quarterback who played much of last season, had a really strong preseason, and then struggled mightily last week. And the Steelers lost and didn't look great at times this week. It almost looks like he's playing the game through a straw, and by that I mean that he's not seeing the entire field. Granted, the offensive line, which was retooled in theory over the offseason, they had some additions, hasn't been as consistent as perhaps they want to be. And you can point fingers at the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, but at the end of the day, Kenny Pickett has to execute the plays. He didn't do it last week. He did it at times this week. Yes, he threw the touchdown pass, 71 yards to George Pickens. That was all Pickens doing the heavy lifting on a blown coverage. So you probably don't feel great. You're happy to get the win. Kenny Pickett is one of the hardest workers in the NFL and certainly a team leader, but he has to step up and play with more consistency because otherwise this Steelers team is not going to go very far.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the arm talent of Kenny Pickett is ever going to be the hallmark of this offense or of his game. That being said, there needs to be a complementary rushing attack. For the second consecutive week, there was none of that for the Steelers. 41 yards rushing a week ago. They do up it to 55 here, but what are you seeing in that aspect of their game or lack thereof? Yes, it's apparent that they don't have the hogs up front to get the run game going, but they do have some backs back there to abandon the run the way that they have. Do you take any issue with it?
You would like to see more consistency in the run game for sure. Last week I get abandoning the run. They were down early and often to that 49ers team. But Najee Harris doesn't look to have the juice that he's had at times, certainly what he had at Alabama and when the Steelers selected him in the first round. Again, part of that is getting hit 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage virtually every time he touches the ball. That said, when Jaylen Warren gets the rock, he's hitting the hole hard with authority and ripping off long runs, even though he was an undrafted free agent. You have to find some balance there. The Steelers have not been able to do that. And again, you can question the play calling, Joe, because oftentimes in a Matt Canada offense, you'll see an incompletion on first down, and then for reasons that defy rationality and comprehension, he'll run it on 2nd and 10. Yeah. And you're not setting up your team or your running backs for success. So it has to be some balance there. We haven't seen it yet. And they have a lot of things to sort out, but they feel like they're a little easier to sort out when you eke out a win, especially against a division opponent.
Everything gets easier when you're getting 14 points from your defense as well.
Absolutely.
If you could put together a run game and add it to what this defense offers, you might have a playoff team. Talk to me about the defense. I mean, taking the ball away, putting it in the house twice in this instance. TJ Watt does get in the end zone for the first time in his career. That seemed like something
that's a shocker.
He'd done plenty of times before. But just the intensity that group brings week in and week out. What does it do for a team in this process of trying to figure out who you are offensively?
Yeah, you see the strip sack here from Alex Highsmith, and TJ Watt does the rest. I feel like TJ Watt was going in the end zone no matter what, whether he picked it up at the opponent's 10 or his own 10. And this is just, this team goes through their defense. This isn't a Big Ben, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell offense. This is a team that's going to rely on their defense, much in the same way Big Ben did early in his career when he arrived in Pittsburgh back in 2004. But the Steelers have historically had bookend edge rushers that get after. You see James Harrison's name on that list. He played alongside the Lamar Woodley, the former second-round pick out of Michigan. You saw Jason Gilda's name on that list. He played with Joey Porter Sr. and Clark Hagan's Colorado State shout-out. So there is a long lineage of successful edge rushers, and we saw it most recently in T.J. Watt, who, again, the Steelers have been known for the defense. He now holds the team record for career sacks, which is incredibly impressive.
House call on the night that he sets the sack record, a night for the Watts to remember here, TJ specifically. Let's get back to the Browns here for a second, because we know this Chubb omission is going to make things harder on everybody, specifically Deshaun Watson.
Yes.
But is this, in an odd way, an opportunity for Watson to be the number on his game check?
Well, I think if you turn that question around, you might ask, do you want this to be an opportunity for Deshaun Watson to have to take over this offense? Because what we've seen, Joe, has not been pretty. And you can continue to say, well, he's knocking the rust off. He started 6 games last season, and 8 games, in fact, I believe, and they were up and down. And we saw more up and down tonight. And perhaps the oddest thing is he got 2 personal foul calls for face masks, which I've never heard of in the history of organized football. But you see the short touchdown pass here to Jerome Ford after they lost Nick Chubb. And he had a few throws to Amari Cooper, who is quietly one of the best wide receivers and route runners in the NFL. But there were also a lot of balls that were thrown out of bounds, including the last ball in which Joey Porter Jr. was in coverage. And you're wondering exactly what Deshaun Watson's seeing, the decisions he's making. He took a lot of sacks, and yes, he was under pressure. But I don't know if this is going to help him elevate his game. I think Nick Chubb is the best way to elevate Deshaun Watson's game, even though he's getting that big paycheck, help him out with a running game. And now Kevin Stefanski and that offense has got to figure out some ways to put Deshaun Watson in positions to succeed. And he hasn't quite done that consistently enough for me.
I'm glad you brought up the 2 personal fouls, the face masks. An oddity, certainly, but also looked like some frustration boiling to the forefront, whether it was because of the loss of his feature back or some of the struggles they were having offensively. Also threw a little bit of a shove in there on a referee. and I know it's in good fun in moments. Nobody was hurt in these actions, but it looked like a quarterback that in this moment didn't keep his head where it needed to be to orchestrate winning drives. Do you take any issue with who Deshaun Watson has been between the whistles on field in leading this team and the guy he's going to have to be now with the omission of just that stalwart to hand it to next to him?
Yeah, so there are 2 lines of thought, right? I don't know Deshaun Watson, and I haven't talked to anyone in that organization about whether he's a great team leader or not. This isn't necessarily setting a great example. On the other hand, you like to see a little fire from your players. Now, you don't want it necessarily in the form of 30 yards worth of personal foul penalties, but maybe it sends a message that we're not going to lay down, even though we lost Nick Chubb. You don't want to put your hands on an official for any reason, and I would imagine that Deshaun may be seeing a fine from that in the coming days. But I think there are 2 schools of thought about how do you feel about Deshaun's performance. At the end of the day, if he gets the 2 face mask penalties and he throws for 400 yards and they win that game, no one cares. Now this will be a talking point on local radio tomorrow, no doubt, and there will be plenty of questions to answer. I think the frustration line is exactly right. We have not seen the best of Deshaun Watson, nothing close to what we saw in Houston. And honestly, Joe, I don't know when we're going to see that, because I haven't seen enough consistency in his game to say, oh, we're only 2 weeks away, we're 3 weeks away. I feel like we could be months away.
Both of these teams now sitting at 1-1, and the road that is just got longer for these Cleveland Browns without Nick Chubb. Ryan, thank you.